And so I'd like to thank you guys for being here. If you guys, this is your first time here, please consider subscribing.
Sterling, I don't know if you can hear us.
I can hear you guys. Oh, I can hear you guys. Sorry. Yeah, I can hear you guys. Is everything okay?
You got it. I
Oh,
can't, at least on my side, I'm just checking it. On my side, I can't hear your audio coming through on YouTube.
is
He
that?
muted himself earlier.
Let me see. I'll just.
Or audio coming through on YouTube.
Is
He
that...
muted
Oh no, I can
himself.
hear me. I just checked the stream. The audio's on.
Gotcha.
Anyway, so that's what we're gonna be doing today. If you guys consider subscribing, that'd be great. You guys can fire questions into the old live chat, and we have. If you like what people are saying, you can check in the subscription for their links. And yeah, without further ado, who did we say was going first? Oh, you can unmute
That
your
would be
guys'
me.
self. Mark. Okay, awesome. Well, why don't you get started?
All right. Good evening and good morning, everybody. My name is Mark. I am just a pastor from First Baptist Church over here in Subang Jaya. But I'm also having the privilege of co-founding a Explain Apologetics, which is a local apologetics ministry over here in Malaysia. We seek to share and explain the faith through Jesus Christ. And I'm very happy to be given the opportunity to talk about the question: Is there an afterlife? And so, obviously, from my Christian background, then you will know that I do believe that there is life after death, and I do have a couple of things to talk about. I want to first and foremost say that the outline is not directly my own. I got it from Professor Peter Kreeft. He was formerly a lecturer over at Boston College on philosophy, but I've added a bit more of my personal perspective on this. So the first thing I want to say about how I agree that there is life after death is the first point I just want to say is that I don't think there's any good reason to not believe that there is life after death. I'll leave it to Tom. I'll leave it to anyone else in the group to discuss that afterwards, and also prepare in his presentation if he has any. The second thing I would like to say, and this one I will elaborate a lot more, is that there are some good reasons to believe that there is life after death. A couple of reasons. The first one, of course, is that there is given from authority. Some people would say that it is one of the weakest arguments, but although it is weak, it is still quite a reasonable argument as I would like to believe it. A simple uh, perception would be from Peter Kreeft, where he says 40 million Frenchmen can be wrong, but it's less likely than 4 Frenchmen being wrong. So we are talking, and we're not talking about 40 million people, we're not talking about 400 million people, we're talking about 4 billion people who do believe that, or at least have the inclination to believe that there is life after death. So that's my first thing. The second thing is the whole notion of anima hominis. Anima hominis basically is the spirit or the soul of the human being. In our experience as human beings, we tend to believe ourselves to be more than just our bodies. So, first of all, one very obvious and very simple reason would be to look at the presence of the soul. Pick, let's not make it too personally. Why not we just take a look at an animal of a sort. So let's say we have 2 cows, and let's say I present you with 2 cows, except that instead of just them being 2 cows, one is alive and the other one is dead. Now, a person, he's quite smart really, and he looks at these 2 cows. Would he then notice the difference? By physical mass and by sheer existence, both cows are completely the same. But the fact that one is alive and one is dead already adds or takes away value on one or the other. There seems to be just a very obvious upfront. Well, there's a big difference. One's alive, one's dead, and the big difference therefore would be the soul. So there is the presence of the soul, and how the soul experience and how the soul is valued is quite obvious when you put 2 animals next to each other, one being alive and one being dead. Moreover, there's the idea of the transcendence of the soul. The soul does not just think of itself as a body; it can actually appreciate the body. You can appreciate you can't not just appreciate your own body, but appreciate even inanimate objects, even if it's just for practical reasons. Like, for example, I appreciate the rocks and stones because I can build a house. But the fact that we can do that tells us that we are more than just uh, physical beings. Yeah, they were more than just physical beings. That the fact that we can appreciate ourselves means that we are somewhat higher than just merely our own physical beings, and that will give credit to the soul. Third thing is the idea of the immortality of the soul. I believe it was Plato in Republic, and he mentioned of the idea that there is evil for everything. And this, when I mean by evil, is things that destroys the very nature of a thing. So, for example, rust will cause steel to decay. Mold for the corn, and even for the soul. Plato had said that the soul has something which makes it evil: injustice, intemperance, cowardice, ignorance. But does any one of these dissolve and destroy it? The answer is no. Then, since it is not destroyed by any evil at all, neither its own evil nor foreign evil, it is clear that the soul must be, of necessity, be immortal. And so, because the soul is immortal, when the physical body dies, we then need to ask the question: where does the immortal soul go? And therefore, that would be the premise on the idea of life after death, because of the immortality of the soul. Final point I have is on the very nature of God, the ratione Dei. Two natures of God comes into mind when it comes to life after death, and the first one is justice. True justice true justice can only happen if there is life after death. Now, what do I mean by that? If we think of the idea there is no life after death, and if we've done something horrible, criminal, terribly wrong, the best way out of it, therefore, is suicide. The best way to get out of justice is to get out of this life and just die. Because why? After when we die, it's nothing. So Adolf Hitler, when he committed suicide in a bunker at the end of World War II, he has practically won. He has nothing else to add, and there's nothing we can do about it. But if there is life after death, then the nature of justice, which is then full justice, which is the nature of God, can come into play, because soul is immortal, and therefore he has to pay the immortal consequence. And second thing about the nature of God is love. Love is an irrational thing. It seems very natural for us to do things, but it's also very irrational. When we have loved ones and they pass away and they die, we grieve. Why is it that we grieve? Is it because we have sentimental value? Well, that could be. That could be the reason why some people would cry and mourn and grieve over their loved ones. But most likely, the trigger of it all is that we will feel it in our heart, albeit a romantic notion, but it is there, that our love for the person is inseparable. Our love for the person is very different from loving another person. I cannot just simply replace one loved one with another loved one. It will never be exactly the same. And what is the nuance of that difference? It will have to be the uniqueness of the person's soul. So, of course, as a Christian, I would say that for God so loved the world, He gave His one and only Son, so that whoever believes in Him shall not perish but have eternal life. Now, of course, people say, but He perished, He died, which is why my final argument, and the only, well, I can say personally, the only reason why I will even believe that there is an afterlife is because Christos anesti, because Christ has risen. So, because Jesus Christ had risen from the dead, that is the foundation belief of the Christian faith. That is the reason that will be the only reason why that there is an afterlife. Why? Because Jesus did die, but He did rise back to life, and therefore there is an afterlife. And if not by His miracle, or actually most likely by His miracle, by adding to His miracle, the other thing that we'll say is that if it is true that He has risen from the dead, then whatever He has said also must be true. And what else has He said? He said that I go and prepare a place for you. I am there. I will come. I will come at the end of time. I will come at the end of times, and there'll be no more grief, no more tears. And this is the hope, the true hope that we have as a Christian when we talk about life after death. And I find this to be a lot more relevant today, especially with the number of rising deaths over because of this COVID-19. And one thing that we can say is that one of the sheer reasons why we can still have hope and be willing to fight on is not just the value of the life that we have now, but also the hope that we have in life to come. So these are the points I have regarding how I believe there are some good reasons to believe that there is life after death. Thank you for the time. I now pass the time over to Brenton, who will be sharing the next points.
Hey, folks. Thanks for that, Mark. My name is Brenton Lengel. I am a poet, playwright, comic author, and I'm also working on a novel. And this is a subject that's actually really close to me. The question is there an afterlife? And it's one of the most fundamental, important, and compelling questions in all of human history. The riddle, or perhaps joke, of death is something that is at the center of every major religious and spiritual tradition. We are creatures that find the concept of our own inevitable annihilation to be exceptionally distressing. But if we owe ourselves to look into it, because if we can answer the question, what is it to die? What will happen to me? And most importantly, what will happen to those that I love? We gain a huge insight into the next question, what is it to live? No doubt all of us have heard a number of stories that claim to answer this question. I will be trying my best today to tell you one of my own, because this is a subject that is uniquely important to me. The moment I learned about death, I felt a great sadness, but beneath it, a kind of joy and excitement. What a mystery. The toddler version of me thought. In a way, I couldn't wait to die, to see beyond that door, to figure out what all the fuss is about. That sense of wonder and discovery that I held as a small child has been with me ever since, and in fact has informed a great deal of my artistic work. As J.M. Barrie put it in Peter Pan, to die would be an awfully big adventure. And from where I'm sitting, that is exactly what I hope death to be, the final and in every sense of the word, ultimate adventure. Flash forward to 2007. I was working at a pizza oven at a rock and roll and sketch comedy dinner theater when I received a text message. My dear friend Adam, who had been my first friend in the exceptionally rural Kentucky town my parents had moved me to, had died in his sleep. I called his phone. His grandfather answered, and he told me in his kind, broken, and harrowed voice that it was true. Last night, Adam passed away. My legs became weak. My breathing quickened, and I sat in the corner next to the 500-degree pizza oven, and I cried. I don't know for how long I cried. A week later, I quit my job and set out to hike the Appalachian Trail, Maine to Georgia. Death has been with me ever since. Death has been like a shadow, driving me forward with both the carrot and the stick, with silence and heartbreak and passion, and still, underneath it all, that sense of childlike wonder. I'm going to make two promises in this debate. The first of which is that I will conceal absolutely nothing. I will be 100% straight with everyone here. I will not claim to believe anything that I do not wholeheartedly know to be the case. And second, I will at no point invoke what philosopher Alan Watts refers to as, quote, spooky knowledge. Nothing that I say today will be predicated on the claim that I have any kind of unique insight or private revelation or sensory perceptions that are not available to the average person. Everything that I'm going to talk about is right out there in the open to be experienced by a Buddhist, a Christian, an atheist, or any other type of human. Though I may invoke Buddhist scripture, it is only to illustrate what we all already know but don't yet realize because we haven't looked at it from the proper perspective. So what is it to die? What is death? And what comes after? And knowing what comes after, how should we behave while we are alive? Well, to look at death, you have to look at life. And what is life? Life is sensory. Life is experience. Life is consciousness. And as life and death are opposites, or as we would in Buddhism say, dependently originate, which is a fancy way of saying they go together. Death is the lack of sensation, experience, and consciousness, in the same way that cold is the lack of heat, and up does not exist without down. You can't have black without white, and you can't have life without death. So then, using this frame of mutually arising, mutually dependent phenomena, we see that life and death are not actually separate things any more than the top of a chessboard is separate from its bottom. They can never meet because, well, you can't stack a chessboard on top of itself. You can't bring the top of the board into direct contact with its own bottom. They are simultaneously one and yet forever different. So what comes after death? Well, obviously, life. It is the simplest and most elementary thing in the world. After people die, other people are born. You all know this, every one of you. But we all play this little game in our heads where we think, no, those are other people, and in my case, that's it for me. I won't follow this very obvious natural law. After death comes for me, either black will win or white will win. Well, that's as absurd as saying that an army of ups would suddenly invade and defeat and colonize down, and suddenly everything is up all the time. So what will the afterlife be like? Well, really, you all already know. It won't be like being buried alive. No one's going to set you on fire for eternity, and it's certainly not going to be like being in the Elysian fields or a never-ending church service. If anything, death will feel very much like it felt before we were born, as in, it won't. Because feeling, which is to say sensation and experience, are themselves the trappings of life, and death is its opposite. So death doesn't do that. So after death comes life, literally reincarnation. Now, Westerners hear reincarnation and find the idea to be comforting, but a little too comforting to be believed, whereas Easterners, Buddhists, Taoists, and Hindus, look at reincarnation and immediately look for a way to get off the ride. But of course, you can't get off the ride, not while you're stuck on your ego, not while you're thinking of yourself as the little voice in your head, as the ghost controlling your body. And that right there is the problem, the ego. That's the little devil who dreams up a million tortures if black ever wins over white, or promises you infinite pleasure if white ever wins over black. The ego is where this clinging comes from. The first two noble truths state that existence is dukkha, which translates not quite into suffering, as has been widely reported, but in the fact of an ever-pervading dissatisfaction with life due to the fact that we know it's going to end. Or in other words, Sundays are less sweet because you know you have work in the morning. The cause of dukkha is tanha, literally thirst, as in the kind of desire or craving that we ascribe to, say, Ivanka Trump when we see her staring at the very handsome Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. We say, oh, that girl is thirsty. Tanha is lust for life in the most negative and self-destructive sense of the term. Tanha is a blind craving for permanence in an impermanent world based entirely on the illusion created by your ego. To stop tanha, to stop being so thirsty, is to stop dukkha. You don't feel bad about it if you don't cling to it. To stop senselessly craving, coveting permanence is to stop suffering. If you think about this, you, existing as you are, is really the exception and not the rule. The rule is you not existing. And considering the total length of the life of the universe, we as individuals spend all but a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of that time not existing. And yet we fear it so much because we don't think. But if the only universal constant is change, and I think that is correct, then you already have an answer to the riddle of death. If everything changes always, then eventually the state of you, being dead or not existing, also changes. We know this for a fact because for billions upon billions of years, you already didn't exist. And then that changed, and everything will change back. You are born, you die, you are born again, in infinite combinations and sometimes the same combination. If you think about it, this is actually the best of all possible worlds, because you get to have your cake and eat it too. You get to relive your life in exactly the same way you're living it now, and you get to have infinite variations, and you get to live a life of an infinite multiplicity of lives in every form after every fashion imaginable, from peasant to king to fruit fly. You get to be all the saints and all the sinners and everything in between, and through it all, the thing that makes it both meaningful and painful is the constant anticipation that this time might really be the last. But it never is, because there is a polarity to life. It's like a wave, and you can't have the crest of the wave without the trough. And it's been like this from the very beginning and will always be like this. Existence is endless and ever-changing. So if your current temporal state isn't the real you, and honestly it can't be, then what is the real you? Well, if you're the exception, then the rule is the real you. And what is the rule? The rule is the flux. It is the dance of energy. It's all of this throughout all times and places, all galaxies. That's the real us. As G.K. Chesterton put it, the million masks of God. We are quite literally everything that there is. Everybody is I. You all know you're you. And to realize this not on the intellectual level, but at a visceral level, where you know it, where you believe it and feel it in your heart, and you know that rascal, your ego, isn't really there, except as a voice and a source of fear for 80 or so years. That is enlightenment. That is nirvana. Literally, to blow out, as in, phew. And that's really what a Buddha is. It's just someone who realizes this. It's someone who has seen through Maya, the illusion, to what reality actually is and how we are all connected. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, the mystic law of the Lotus Sutra, called mystic because it's hard to understand. It is hard to see what we are faced with, all this struggle, uncertainty, pain, and impermanence of life, is something that is at its core essentially playful rather than serious. That's why I call death a joke. Because it is. It's literally a joke. It is a trick that you, I, we all play on ourselves. Because it's very exciting to imagine that the darkness or the light might win. It makes for great fiction, but also it causes a great deal of confusion, frustration, regret, and misery if you take it too seriously. So, exhale. Breathe out and know that the next wave, the next breath is always coming. Because that's what the cycle of life and death is. It is a dance of energy. It is vibration. It is pattern. And we're all supposed to dance while the music is playing. So dance. And don't worry about it so much. Thank you.
Awesome. So, Tom, you can go ahead and go into your opening speech. Oh, man.
There we go. Should be good now. So the question is there an afterlife? And the answer is probably not. The way we need to assess if there's an afterlife is, well, we need to show, is any hypothetical afterlife imaginary or real? Is it just something we've made up in our heads, or does it actually exist? And to do that, well, we need some way to differentiate between these two things, these two categories. Now, we can make up lots of stories that sound nice and mystical and give us hope and justice and passion and rewards after we die, which is what humans always do, because that's what we would like. Like, we imagine our lives going better tomorrow than they did today. But there's not actually any evidence to support that. It's just kind of a made-up assertion. In order for something to be justified, you would need to show that that imagined perception of what's afterlife actually is afterlife and not just part of your imagination. And to do that, the system we have to differentiate between what's imaginary and what's real is called science. And science gives us a pretty grounded basis that we don't have any reason to believe there is anything in an afterlife at all. It's just, we have a brain, our brain works, and when it stops working, so do we. And that's kind of the end. Why exactly would there be anything after that? Doesn't make any sense. If there was an afterlife, why not just make life eternal in the first place? So what is the point of adding in the dying part if life is going to be just eternal, which is totally possible? There's no logical contradiction with life being eternal. So there's no reason to have death unless it is probably going to be permanent. But more importantly, atheism and naturalism don't actually rule out an afterlife. There could definitely be an afterlife. I mean, there could be a naturalistic afterlife. Maybe we're in the Matrix, and if we die, we wake up and you're Neo, and you realize, oh, hey, we're actually in this big machine, and there's a second life coming. That's totally possible. So yeah, could there be an afterlife? For sure. But do we have a reason to believe there is one? No, not at this time. We have no way to differentiate all the different imaginary things in philosophy that we could just come up with to explain what's afterlife, and just the imaginary things that have no basis in reality. And so we have no reason to believe there is an afterlife, but there definitely could be. And I definitely like to imagine I'm going to wake up as Harry Potter and be able to cast spells. That is my dream afterlife. So I will concede the rest of my time to the Q&A.
Awesome. Well, I guess we can get right into the discussion. If you guys want to kind of go back and forth asking each other questions, I'll try not to step in unless everybody's just screaming for some reason. Yeah, go ahead.
Mark, I think you're still muted. Okay. I guess I'll start some things off. So you mentioned that there would be not a problem with life being eternal, I actually take issue with that. There's a number of problems with life being eternal, like life in the physical reality being eternal, if you actually think that through. The first and most obvious one is if we lived forever, the human brain would not have the capacity to take in all that information. So like we would just overload and be forgetting huge chunks of our lives and just have like a computer that's overly full. Secondly, eternal life.
We already do that. I mean, we do forget stuff, so that's not really a problem.
Right, but my point is that, and if we had eternal life with like memory of it, it would get incredibly boring very, very fast.
Well, that's
finally
an assumption, so I don't really know if that's supportive.
Well, I mean, how would it not get it? How bored do people start to get towards the end of their lives when they're starting to see the same things happen again and again and again?
Well, the reason they're bored is because their bodies are decomposing and they can't do anything. So that's kind of why it's boring. It's not really because they just see the same things. It's because they can't do anything new. So if they always wish for youth. It's not like they wish to stop dying. They wish they were young again so they could do stuff.
Right. But let's say, for instance, for the sake of let's do this little experiment. You have a superpower. You are eternally young, and you have perfect recall, so you're not going to lose what you had before. Eventually, given eternity, you will experience everything there is to possibly experience, and then what are you going to do? The second thing there, though, is that if you did actually live forever, you couldn't be killed, and you were eternally young, there is a 100% chance that you will eventually be trapped forever somewhere horrible. You'll fall down a mine shaft. You'll be covered in You'll be covered in cement, and you'll spend a millennia just sitting there trapped, unable to die. So, like, dying is really, really important in material reality for like creatures, or at least that's my thoughts on it.
Well, yeah, I would disagree with those 2 points. One is that if we're eternal and young forever, we wouldn't necessarily experience everything. That actually, we can prove that false using Cantor's diagonal mathematical proof that you can't actually experience everything. You can only experience a finite, countable, infinite number of things, and there are more than a countable, infinite number of things. So you couldn't actually experience everything.
Okay, but we'll say pedantic. You could experience enough that everything becomes an old hat.
Well, no, that would also not be true, because you could potentially just find a way to erase your memory if you wanted to and re-experience something, and there would always be new stories. There's infinitely many. Yeah,
but the erasing of your memory is death, essentially. Like philosophically, it would be the same thing. There wouldn't be continuity.
No, I mean, people have amnesia. They're not dead. I don't know what you're talking about.
No, they're not dead from us, but from their own perspective, if they don't have continuity with the previous life.
No, death is the brain death where you stop experiencing consciousness. As long as you keep experiencing consciousness, you're still alive. So it doesn't matter if you remember anything or not.
Yeah, that might make a point from like somebody's that might make sense from outside, but from inside, I don't see the difference.
Well, the definition of life is just simply like metabolism. So as long as you have metabolism, you're alive. Memory plays no part in being alive. So that's
okay, but again, that's outside in. I'm talking inside out.
I'm just talking the definition of life. Like your consciousness and memory isn't a part of actual life. It's not. It's just something you experience. It's like saying your sense of touch is your life. If you lose your sense of touch, you're still alive. It's not. You don't actually need that.
Okay.
But your second point was that we might get trapped at some point. Yeah,
we definitely will get trapped at some point. You've got forever.
Yeah, but that's again not a necessity, because you could essentially just travel in space in one direction forever and never get trapped. That's a possibility. Or you could sit in a chair forever and never get trapped, and that's also a possibility. Or you could upload your brain
sitting in a chair forever and not getting. That's the definition of trapped. You just did that on purpose to avoid getting trapped.
The definition of trapped is stuck there involuntarily. If you're there voluntarily, you're not trapped.
Right, but you're there involuntarily because you're afraid of getting trapped.
No, you're just sitting there because you choose to. I didn't say anything about fear there. You could choose to sit in a chair for a long period of time and not move without a problem.
All right.
So there's no reason to think you would necessarily get trapped.
It seems pedantic to me. I just think eventually you're going to fall down a mine shaft.
And again, you could just say that if we're going to live forever, we could also have other powers too. Like technology would increase as well. And so we would be able to essentially like upload our consciousness to a computer and have essentially the same powers as the Matrix.
Yeah, but would that really be you if you uploaded your conscience to your consciousness to a computer?
If it's your
wouldn't that just be a copy?
If it's your consciousness, then it's you. It wouldn't.
But yeah, right. But how do you move a consciousness, like a physical consciousness that is within your body? How do you separate that from your body and put it in a computer?
You literally just move it. So consciousness is a biochemical process in the brain, and you can take that biochemical process and replace a cell with a microchip or whatever, a mechanical thing one at a time, and you will still be there. So you can just replace one cell at a time from biological to mechanical. And
That's the ship of Theseus fallacy.
Well, it's not a fallacy.
Well, you could okay, not a fallacy, but you're making a ship of Theseus argument.
That's correct, because your identity would remain the same. Your parts aren't what make you. It is the chemical process in your brain, so you could replace them one at a time and still be you, which is what happens to our cells anyway.
So what makes you you?
The biochemical process in your brain.
Okay, so the biochemical process in the brain is what makes you you. So if there was a copy of that biochemical process, like an exact copy, there would be two yous, correct?
No, each one of those would be its own you because they'd have two different biochemical processes and two different brains.
Okay, so how is taking the biochemical process and moving it into an electrical process in a computer not creating two yous?
It's the same you. Again, you're just taking your own biochemical process and replacing the cells.
I mean,
I
get the concept that you're taking this ghost, whatever but I don't see how you can even take the ghost out of the body and put it into something that's not even organic and consider it the same thing.
Well, again, so you're not taking it anywhere. It's your body. You just take the cells and replace them one at a time with mechanical cells. So it's still your body. Just like your cells die, you know. So,
so you're saying you like cyborg yourself. So you literally build. Yes. Okay, but then it's not your consciousness; it's your body.
Those kind of the Bicentennial Man. Anybody watch that movie?
With Robin Williams, I haven't seen it, but you guys should talk about it.
Yeah,
but so your body and your brain.
You're talking about
reverse
order then, because the Bicentennial Man, for example, he had consciousness first, was developed, but then he decided to develop organs so that he can degrade and die. Whereas for you, you'll be in the reverse order. You are in a biological body. You will degrade. You will die unless you start replacing bionically. Until then, the question would be, if you replace all of your extensions, if you replace all your extensions with artificial intelligence, will you still be you?
Well, you replace all of your biological parts with mechanical parts.
Yeah. Then the question would be, would you still be you? Yeah, yes. I can imagine there's an idea that it can still be you, but it'll be a different kind of you, simply because you're gonna have to mechanically organize yourself a little differently, you know.
Sure.
Yeah, and plus also the Theseus ship and I'm sorry, I didn't get that name right. The
ship of Theseus. Yeah,
it's Theseus. Yeah, the ship of Theseus idea and the Bicentennial Man idea. The one thing they didn't like expand the idea bigger would be therefore the possibility of cloning. So for you, Tom, you mentioned about replacement, but replacement can also be it can also bring potential for fabrication. So if let's say we're able to clone you, albeit mechanically, would there be two yous, or would you still be you and the other you still be you, and you would not really be you, and you also would not really be you?
No, there would be two different people, but both have the same same memories.
Yeah. So what would therefore be the differentiation other than just two physical presences?
They have different experiences. So we literally can't exist in the exact same space at the exact same time. So one exists.
But experiences are not real. Not to say not real, but experiences are not alive because they have happened, and therefore we're not really sure as to whether our past it really happened.
Experiences shape your consciousness. So the experience that person A is having, because they're in a different space and a different time, shapes that consciousness, that brain, differently than the person who's experiencing the other one. So they're different people because there's one consciousness over here in this brain and there's one consciousness over here in this brain, and they're literally separate entities. They're not connected in any way. They can do things differently.
I won't take issue with that, but you're opening yourself up to the fact that if you define that as personhood, that means that you 7 years or so later in life, or you even from moment to moment, are a different person than you were previously.
No, because personhood is, again, just the biochemical process in the brain. That's biochemical process is constituent throughout my life. So I'm still the same person from birth to death, even though I'm made of different parts.
Why is it constituent through? But you just said different experiences alter it. So
right. So they're two different people because there's two different biochemical processes, both going on at the same time, but in different locations. If they were one person, they would be the same biochemical process, or they would be connected biochemical processes in some sense. Because they're separate, they're different people.
So to follow this down, I know this couldn't happen, but let's say by some magic or by some technology, we create an exact clone of you with exactly the same biochemical processes, and I don't know, say we use a simulation to have it have the exact same experience as you have at all times. Is that two yous, or is that two separate people?
Still two separate people, because there's two separate biochemical processes.
In fact,
So is it the experiences that make it, or is it the biochemical processes?
No, those are the same thing. The experiences cause the biochemical process. Those are connected. So what makes them separate is that they are literally physically separated. Whatever happens to one will not cause an effective change to the other, which means they are literally separate things. It's the law of identity, A equals A. And if there's different properties in one than the other one, then they are not the same thing. And so if they are like in different spatial areas, they are literally not the same thing. So they are just two different biochemical processes, even though they share every other property exactly alike. Simply because they are like different locations and not connected, they are two different people.
I mean, okay, I'm sort of getting that, but again, that seems to fly directly in the face of the uploading your consciousness to a computer, gradually becoming a cyborg.
I don't see how, because that's still one biochemical process that just continually is on the whole time.
So I get the confusion between Brenton and Tom, because, well, let's think about it very simply, like bureaucratically. If, let's say, for example, we are able to make twins of Tom, and we go and register them because we now have two bodies, to which then they will say, okay, who is Tom? Then both said, I am. But then we'll still have to find the means of differentiation. So there'll be TJump original and then TJump 2.0.
The new Coke.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So by doing that, you have two. By doing that, you therefore automatically have two unique identities. Yeah. So there'll be two unique identities. So yeah, I mean, the reason why I don't find that controversial, simply because it is plausible, although I don't find it to be very probable. Simply because authorship of souls requires much more than just bionic cells. Tom, the other thing that you mentioned that I think that Brenton would resonate a bit more is the idea that what if it's not just a copy and paste? What if it's just a transfer? If it's transfer, then the whole karmic experience, which you would put that the soul to be, yes, it will be booted up. It will be booted up over. But because Tom, I think one thing Brenton that will differentiate with you is that when you go into the computer, when you go into a computer, or even from a computer to another bionic cell or another mechanical to bear your conscious identity, it would still be quite different, because the appendages of which you had first experienced yourself to be will be quite different from what you could possibly be. So same but different. That's a very common Thai expression.
Sure. So yeah, like when you lose an arm or something, you'll be different. You'll have different experiences too.
Yeah, but if you do a full body transfer, it will be a complete difference, because not even one appendage of you will follow you, and therefore you will be different. You won't be TJump anymore. You'll be Tom Tan. You'll be one of my cousins, maybe.
Yeah.
And you'll probably be made in China. Yeah. You know.
Or that's not really a problem in my theory. Like you're not going to be literally the exact same, because yes, you're definitely going to have changes. That's not a problem, but you'll be the same person, even though you won't be literally exactly the same in every possible way.
Yeah, it seems like what's being drawn here between when a person is a person in continuity and when there is a lack of continuity and two people in one way or another in our hypothetical scenarios here, it seems very arbitrary at this point.
So again, it's just a biochemical process. If you have a biochemical process that's going on in the brain, that's you. And if it's not shared by another biochemical process, then it's just an isolated thing.
Okay, so for instance, take Phineas Gage. Yeah. Phineas Gage takes the frickin' thing through the brain, and he goes through a complete and utter personality change. Is he still Phineas Gage, or is he somebody else?
Still Phineas Gage, still the same biochemical process.
Even though he thinks differently and acts differently, it's because that's the biochemical process. Okay, but then if the biochemical process is organically is the same, then we would have two people again. Like person in bodies.
I think you're conflating what you mean by the same. By the same, I mean it's still the same biochemical process is still occurring in the same brain. So like if we take a computer and we drill a hole in the processor, it's still the same computer. There's a part of it that isn't working the same way. So it's still the same process. For it to be a different person, what you'd have to do is you'd have to end the process completely or divide the process into two parts, and both processes are going on at the same time, essentially. Separate.
Okay, but say for instance we take the pieces of that computer that's just been drilled through, we remove all of them and we put them inside a new computer with a different tower, but and then replace the broken piece. That's a completely different computer, right?
Yeah, if we stopped the biochemical process and changed all the pieces, then yes, it would be a completely different computer.
Okay, so then Star Trek, if you beam somebody from a planet to the other, you'd completely disassemble them and then put them back together. Then you've killed them and just put a new person in the area.
Yes,
right?
I would argue that is a new person.
Okay, you're consistent at least with that. I kind of disagree, but.
Yeah. Tom, may I ask you from the other perspective? So the classic Jekyll and Hyde, same body but different, same body but different chemical reactions, I suppose, happening in your body, because he does take a drug and then he becomes a totally different person.
Yep.
Are there therefore two consciousness in the same body?
Yes,
Is that
possible? We actually know of many cases like that. It's called if you damage I forget what it's called, the cerebellum, cerebrum. Cerebral cortex. It's the thing that connects the left and the right hemisphere of the brain. And if you damage that, then the left and right hemisphere of the brain start to develop independently, and you actually get two completely different people, two personalities that develop in the brain separately from one another. So you do actually get two different people in the same brain.
Wait, so then Phineas Gage is two different people?
No, because that's still one consistent biochemical process. The reason
can you show me exactly where you're drawing the line here? I'm just trying to figure this out.
It's a coherent biochemical process. So the biochemical process in the case where you damage that part of the brain, which is killing me, I can't remember what it's called, it separates the left and right hemisphere of the brain. So there's a biochemical process going on the left, which is separate from the biochemical process going on the right. There's two separate biochemical processes.
Okay, so the biochemical process is happening in the brain, correct? Or is it happening throughout the entire body?
The brain. You can have it without the body.
Okay, but for instance, there's a lot of evidence, for instance, that wounds to the stomach will cause drastic changes in personality. They can cause depression, severe anxiety that they would otherwise have. So clearly, biochemical processes that's happening in the brain is also happening in the rest of the body. It wouldn't just be localized in the brain.
Well, no, it's you can affect the biochemical process in the brain by damaging other parts of the body or just showing people different kinds of pictures. But there's a certain kind of necessity, you need the brain for the biochemical process of consciousness. You don't need the stomach. If you remove someone's stomach, which has happened, we do that in medicine occasionally, and then we replace it. Yeah, we can remove those, and the consciousness is fine. Even though it's going to be different, there's going to be different feelings, different responses from the body, different things, just like losing an arm or whatever. It's still the same biochemical process. But if we damage the brain, it becomes a different biochemical process. So
then, if let's say this, okay, so the person, they've got their biochemical process running, they're that person, then they die. But this is in the future. Let's say they completely come to a stop. They're completely dead. But we develop some technology in the future that allows us to revive that person and restart that biochemical process. Are they a new person, or are they still the same person?
Probably a new person. Depends what happens in the meantime, but I would guess a new person. If we biochemically froze them so there was absolutely no changes at all, the moment they died, they could still be the same person. But as long as there's going to be some physical changes in the brain, it's probably a different person.
Hey, let's make sure that Mark gets some questions in too, just because I know.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mark.
Oh no, I find the conversation very interesting. I think I'll just have.
Oh, I apologize. It's corpus callosum. It's the corpus callosum. That's the part of the brain.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, my take from this, it would be, Brenton. We both. I think one thing I find this argument to be very interesting is because I will have one foot with Tom, but the other foot with Brenton, and yet at the same time, if I could put my butt on another chair, it would be Christianity. So I'm kind of nicely not lodged, kind of yes, kind of no within all you guys. So I think Brenton, what you and I will find a little bit interesting for what Tom is mentioning is that we have to understand that for him, hardware is secondary, software is primary. So if you take the if you take the mechanism or maybe a biochemical or even just like information, you transfer from one to the other. I mean, we do this all the time, right? When we buy a new computer, we clone over, and then it will look as if it's our old computer from before, but it's in a new body, and therefore we can do much more. You know, Tom, I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting you, but it does sound to be like that mechanically, but you're speaking for more biological construction, lah. You know, so that will be one thing that Brenton and we will not necessarily agree with, because we believe that the software itself would be quite unique, and the reason why it's unique is because it has to go through a certain, what's another word for patina? You know, it's gonna go through from one life into another, from one life to another, with the experience of previously being, let's say, in an older computer and now going into a newer computer. You know, so the experiences from the older computer to a new computer will affect the person's consciousness. So so like I said again, same but different. And Brenton, I would agree with you that what Tom would be saying would seem to be quite arbitrary, only because out of all the genius that is happening in all of these like systems and mechanisms, that there needs to pose a possibility for an author. It only becomes arbitrary because if there's no meaning externally to like an author, an editor, or a reader. So that's why from the Christian perspective, that person would be God, the author, perfecter of faith, the person who writes everyone uniquely, and therefore gives purpose, morality, destiny, and therefore love and justice and all the aspects of. So that'll be my input on it. One question for Brenton, because in your description earlier you mentioned that because of the karmic circle, dukkha, tatna, the nirvana, and then the hope is to pursue the nirvana. So while in pursuing nirvana, we're still in a circle. We're still in a circle of dukkha, living, dying, and living and dying again, which you rightly call it reincarnation. But if good then becomes bad, and then bad then becomes good, then can become good, so on and so forth. How does karma play into that system? Since bad is good, good is bad, so there's not really much of a difference.
Yeah. Well, in a way, there isn't really much of a difference, and I really appreciate you used karma correctly, because a lot of people, like in the West, tend to think of it like it's a video game, and if you do something good, you get good points, and do something bad, you get bad points, and they get stuck to your soul. And
or an 18+ book any 18+ book, which is the first name of sutra.
Yeah. So, karma, the way that karma plays in is karma is doing. It is action. It is the law of the way Daisaku Ikeda puts it is the law of cause and effect. And so karma really can't be escaped from life to life. Like you mentioned souls, and the way I like to think of it is that because of the doctrine of anatman, no self, no ego, no soul, that it's an illusion. There's really one big soul, essentially, that is being reincarnated constantly into literally everything that there is. The Hindus call it Brahman. So what happens with karma is when you do something in your life that has effects, good and bad. And that will ripple out. Every action has a million ripple reactions. You see like chaos theory and the butterfly flapping its wings and whatever. Okay. So, I mean, in a certain extent, good is bad and bad is good, in that they are all karma. They're all doing, and it is the thinking about them, our unique subjective perspective as organisms, that make karma good or bad. But either way, karma is kind of something that Buddhists are looking to get beyond, to transcend. So, the idea being that there's a quote that I do want to read later on from the Lotus Sutra, from the 16th chapter, which is it's been called the beating heart of Mahayana Buddhism. And literally in it, the Buddha says there is no cycle of birth and death. There is no existing in this world and later existing in the other one. It is neither consistent nor diverse. The concept that he's getting at right there is samsara is nirvana. They're the same state. It's just in where your brain is and how you're looking at it that really gets you to where it is. So, once you get to an enlightened state and you've seen through this, you know, the karma doesn't touch you as much as it otherwise would, because, you know, it's I think Daisaku Ikeda has put it as it's like surfing the waves and valleys of existence. You can turn the frustrations of life and the discords of your life and people's lives into a source of joy, even if you are having difficulty in the moment. Like, being a Buddhist, being enlightened doesn't make you a superhero or anything, but it does, again, it's blow out and realize what you are faced with is not something serious necessarily. So I guess that's my answer. That's how karma plays in. There's no individual soul for the karma to stick to, but still the evil that Adolf Hitler did before he killed himself did not, you know, that went on, and that caused misery and harm for every other one of Adolf Hitler's later on incarnations, in the same way that the good that Jesus did went on for every one of Jesus's other incarnations. You know, because again, there's no one else here. It's just us playing like we're not God, if that makes sense.
I appreciate the way that you phrase the universality of karma, because here in Malaysia we can get a little bit sectarian, meaning to say that that's what you believe, sectarian. So that's what you believe, that's what I believe, and that we can never really meet. But you're a bit more encompassing. So I would say that but based on your own description earlier, which is one of the major issues that I get on a regular basis while being here, while being here with Buddhism available right beyond the screen here. Yeah. So my question then to you is that for two things: if samsara is a doing, or karma and samsara is a doing, and therefore that will bring about evil and suffering. Then the logic from that would be that not doing it, sangha, meaning to be put away, to go to a monastery and not do those things, it will be in effect bring forth good karma. Would that be right? But
I mean, it might.
Well, it might, right? But and the reason why I think it might not is simply because the absence of something, the absence of doing something, especially in the face of evil, does not necessarily become good. In fact, it becomes an even worse, a worse evil, and that's called indifference.
Yeah, I'll give you. You know, Nichiren Daishonin, the originator of my sect, was very, very hypercritical of a number of Buddhist sects because they were not out doing good in the world directly.
Humanism. So I have friends who are in the Suchi Foundation, so they also are humanistic Buddhism. So for them, the idea of the Bodhisattva cannot bear the idea of suffering upon others anymore, and so he goes and imparts the Dharma, the Sangha, and the Buddha, so that people will be able to they'll be able to attain it along with him. I just have one problem with that notion. When the Buddha or the Bodhisattva decides to descend down and wishes to share Dharma, Sangha, and the Buddha, wouldn't that in itself be a form of tanat, and therefore he would disconnect himself from his bodhisattva?
You're talking about is the desire to bring others to enlightenment also desire?
Yeah, isn't the desire to not desire in itself a desire? Yeah,
that you're totally right, and that's actually one of the first things in Buddhism. Like when you go after Buddhism seriously, like when you study it, that's one of the first things just about any practitioner of Buddhism will learn about. Like, and it's something that the teachers want you to come to on your own, to realize that, okay, how am I desiring of desire? It's the same thing like with Catholics and grace. How do I get grace if I am, how do I become a good person if I am not already born being a good person? I can't get to grace from a selfish place. It's exactly the same thing. But again, that's like a koan that you use as a mental exercise. Tana is not the total lack of desire. And I think you see a lot of this in what's it called? You see a lot of it in Theravada teaching sometimes. And I don't know as much about Theravada as I know about Mahayana, so I may be getting this completely wrong. But like, I mean, I've done some psychedelics in my life. I took I took Molly and LSD together one time and totally lost all desire for a short period of time, and it was great, for a short period of time where I was like, oh, yeah, I'm the Buddha. But I wasn't actually the Buddha in that instance. I was just repressing the physical desire within my body. Tanha, again, is craving. It's desiring to a level where it hurts you. So the Buddha emanation, essentially, as a bodhisattva, however that's going to be, because in fact in Soka Gakkai, all members of Soka Gakkai, anyone who spreads the Lotus Sutra, is a bodhisattva of the earth. So we don't really think of that as so much of as a magical being as, again, we are all sleeping Buddhas, and that bodhisattva is the Buddha awakening within you. So, you can, whether that would mess with like the metaphysics of it, I mean, it might. I don't really find that to be a compelling question. Like, I found your question compelling, but I don't find the specifics of what happens to like I don't think the Buddha's a superhero that's going to descend and then get sullied by this world. There's a big thing, and I see this a lot in Western thought, and this kind of TJ kind of brought it up when he said like he doesn't think that there's life after death because he sees it ending with just one person. And that's this distinction that you see in the Western style, and it's like Western religion bleeding into Western style atheism. It's almost a religious version of it, in the sense that like there is the distinction between the sacred and the profane, the worldly and the divine. And at least the way I look at it, there is no separation whatsoever. The sacred is the profane, the worldly is the divine. Again, nothing is either good nor bad, but thinking makes it so.
I got a question for both of you. I haven't gotten to ask any questions yet, so I'm a little excited about this.
Yeah.
How do you show that your belief isn't just imaginary? Because as far as I can tell, there's no reason to believe anything you just said. It's very nice. It's very pretty. I don't believe any of it's true. Why should we believe either of what you just said is not just imaginary?
Mark, do you want to go first?
Well, let me see. So TJ from heart to heart, I would say this. It is true that if it weren't for the claims of Christianity, I would rather believe that there is nothing else after life, and simply because it's very convenient. It will be the same convenience of thought which people would have had that if they had a very sucky life, never mind, it's going to end. By the same time, those who have led a very good life and then it's going to end, and then it was also going to end, at least they can say, oh, I ended in a high note. But for me, the issue would be on just two main things. One is from the argument from authority, and yes, you can say that, well, 40 million people can be wrong. In fact, millions of Germans got it really wrong when they voted right. Yeah, I can agree with that. But we're talking about billions of people throughout history, discussing and dialoguing, and there were a number of atheists. I mean, even in the Jewish community, there were the Sadducees who believed that there's nothing after life, and we are been arguing and discussing about that. But equally, I would say that just the claim that is imaginary is not sufficient to say that it doesn't. It's not sufficient to say that to prove that it doesn't exist. However, as long as the idea is probable, then it is something worth to dialogue and discuss about. And Pascal's wager also comes into play into this. I mean, like, for example, let's say it has nothing. Let's say you're right, TJ. If there's nothing, then never mind. I lived a very good life. I have a wife, I have a daughter. I'm in sunny Southeast Asia. It never snows here. It's nice and warm all the time. Sometimes a little too hot. I'm thankful. And if I die now, if I keel over while eating my fourth bowl of rice, I will be. That's absolutely fine. But if there is a consequence, let's say there is karma, for example, to Brenton, then yes, then it gives me a bit more, it gives me a bit more holding upon myself. a pause, and therefore a moral distinction that I probably would need to live something which is a bit higher than myself. The unique case about Jesus is that because he claims that only through him then we can live, that we can have eternal life, then I would say, okay, I would rather therefore go to this extreme, this extreme belief, simply because he claims full exclusivity, whereas and while I am practicing my full exclusivity to Jesus Christ, then I automatically qualify, in my opinion, I will qualify within Buddhism to live a very good karmic life, and at the same time, I will go up to TJ. Oh, if we all die, there's nothing after this, like that, law. In the common Malaysian stance, yeah, it's like that, law.
So just to summarize, your reasons that it isn't imaginary are: one, it makes you feel good; two, there's lots of people who believe it; three, Pascal's wager; and four, Jesus said so. Those are the four reasons.
More so on the fourth. If the fourth wasn't real, then the other three I'll just dump it. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah. I don't see any of those as actual reasons to believe something isn't imaginary. Like,
Yeah,
lots of people
I'm
believe
not.
it is like
I'm not
just a
surprised.
bandwagon.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, DJ, because you have asked a number of other people far more qualified in Christian theology than me. I have followed you in a number of your videos where the title is the same. Is there good reason to believe in God? And I will concede to the simple fact that if 3, 4, 5 different kinds of philosophers and theologians can't convince you, then I'm not even going to attempt and just say like that, law. Yeah, so I just hope that in the end of the day, Bill Craig says it the nicest in that I hope one day that you will have that experience, and from that experience, then transcends from the idea of an imaginary to reality.
Oh yeah, I totally understand that sentiment.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making is that those arguments we can show, those can't differentiate between what's imaginary and what's real. We believe things that make us feel good, even though they may be imaginary. And lots of people believe things even though they may be imaginary. Like, most people used to believe the world was flat at one point, and that doesn't mean that was more likely to be true just because everyone believed it. And most people like to believe that afterlife is like a good thing. Like Pascal's wager, an afterlife under atheism is equally as likely as an afterlife under theism. So either belief is equally as likely to get you reward. And Jesus, I don't think, like, the testimony of the Gospels doesn't show that wasn't imaginary. It's just testimony. So none of those arguments, we can show those arguments can't differentiate between imaginary and what's real. And that was kind of what I was asking, is how do you do that? But I do want to get to Brenton because I haven't heard his response yet.
Thanks. So I would actually I'd be interested to hear what of the things that you think I believe that is imaginary, because I haven't made any supernatural claims whatsoever.
There's an afterlife.
Well, yeah, life is the afterlife that comes after. Like, it's just a different way of looking at it, where you're not looking at it from the perspective of the single ego. Here, you're looking at it as the whole process.
Okay, let me be more specific. When I die, I will then come back to life.
I mean,
or continue
so
life.
Okay, when you die, like, your ego, that's going to be annihilated because it wasn't real to begin with. Like, if you go and you take a person, for instance, and you peel back the layers, we're like onions in the sense we think that there is an ego, we think that there's a core, we think there's this thing, like you talked about, the biological process, but there's nothing in there. So when you die, all that's left is your karma. You're doing the stuff that you've done within your life.
Okay, let's go with that. That is a really good example. So why would we believe that isn't imaginary?
Because you physically did stuff and it has action and reaction. We know that happens.
Sure. So again, but my biochemical process, when that ends, so do I permanently.
Right, but not the mark that you left behind. When you end, any children that you had will continue on. Anybody that you screwed over will still be screwed over. Anyone that you helped will still be helped. The karma continues beyond your individual body here. But then eventually the atoms in your body will be rearranged and you'll be reborn in another form, and you will be affected by that karma and everything else.
That part, the reborn part. Like, why think that's not imaginary?
Well, because it's obvious. After people die, other people are born. After animals die, other things are born. So you just look at the process from a blown-out standpoint as opposed to from an individual, egotistical standpoint.
Well, I grant that new things are born. Like, evolution creates new species all the time. But why think the old species, the me, is going to come back?
If I can translate a little bit so that maybe we can be on a middle ground about this. I think There's this principle of conserving of energy conservation, where the
Yeah,
idea
energy can
that
neither be created
yeah,
nor destroyed.
energy can never be created or destroyed, so therefore it just transforms. So I've heard that from the Venerable K.C. Guru Dhammananda. He's a Theravada Buddhist. He was a Theravada Buddhist over in Malaysia. And he says, yeah, the concept of energy is just transformed. But when it transforms, is that energy still the same energy, or is it a different energy? To which then the answer is, it is the same energy, because in the end it's one energy, but just transforming within itself.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. So that's
yeah,
the thing that's real. Not you, TJ. You are actually the dream, and the reality is the energy itself.
and just the differentiate between Brenton and myself is that for him, he will put the ideas that that energy is the conscious, is the conscious, is the being and the re-being. Whereas for me, the physical can remain physical, but the soul is a very separate narrative altogether.
Yeah. So, like, there's this thing that you really see, like, with Western-style atheists, and I used to be a Western-style atheist before I became a practicing Buddhist, and I think it kind of comes from the fact that in Christian tradition, a lot of times Jesus was associated, like, and especially God, like God, our version of God, comes from Zeus, from the Greeks. That's why he's got the long beard and the robes. And a lot of the ways that we behave are based upon like human political organizations. Catholic Church is based on medieval courts and a monarchy, where the sovereign is God, or Jesus or the priest with his back to the wall. Protestant churches are based on courts, like, and you just transpose the pastor with the judge. And what happened was there were all of these religious wars in Europe, all of these prosecutions. It was very bloody, very horrifying, and when we ran our society off of this, and people had just had enough of it, and we said, no, we're done with being viewed by this all-seeing eye from God. I mean, you saw what's his face, Christopher Hitchens talking about how God is North Korea forever, because it's the sort of a big brother dictator seeing everything. But what happened was, and I really think a lot of this goes back to the Enlightenment, is that they went the other direction with it, and they dreamed up a universe where everything is like all dead. Essentially, it's all matter. The really like hard materialist coming, like almost like what you see with Marxism, the idea that like we're all just stuff, and it's a random connection of stuff, and consciousness is just a very sophisticated process of matter. Okay, fine. Consciousness is just a very sophisticated process of matter, but that means also that matter is just a very basic form of consciousness, and by that logic, rocks are conscious to a certain extent. You bang on a rock, you get some reaction back. So what happened is that we dreamed up this version of the world where the world itself is stupid and dead, and we're a ghost in a body that's going to appear and then die and disappear forever. And I really don't think that that's correct. There's always a way to talk about something like it's garbage. You can sit there and you can say, oh, a bunch of people listening to a symphony, they're just a bunch of idiots going out of their mind listening to a bunch of complicated sounds. Or you can change your perspective and talk about it like it's a freaking symphony. I'm hearing some of the best music in the universe. So really, like, what I find too often is the emphasis in Western-style atheism on this type of materialism that basically means you have to look at the world like it's crap, and you have to be pissed off about everything all the time. Now, I'm not saying you necessarily do that, but I'm saying there is definitely a tendency in that I see in Western atheists. It's something that I felt before I found Buddhism and before I started practicing, and that since I've come through that and come to the place where I am now, I can look at the wonder of life in the universe and my place in it, as a piece of the great Brahma, a piece of the universe. And when this body dies, when I disappear, well, that's okay, because I'm going to come back in a bunch of different variations. Now, I will give you this quick thought experiment, though, because you asked like how would you yourself come back, the biochemical process, all of that. And I don't know if you'd consider it like this, but I did find this pretty interesting. Given an infinite amount of time, we know that your life happened the way that it happened once. The Big Bang happened, everything came together, and all of the different karma came together so that you would live the life that you are living right now, and you're talking to me. And then eventually, you're going to die, right? Well, if we give that infinite time, and if we hold in our heads the idea that the only constant in the universe is change, eventually that state, as I said in my opening statement, is going to change. The state of you as you are being dead will change, and eventually, if it happened once, it will happen again, and you will wind up living the exact same life that you are living. It may take aeons, it may take more time than would happen, but it will eventually happen given an infinite timeline and infinite change.
Okay, so 2 questions for you. One is there anything in your position which you would disagree with physicalism?
Physicalism, define physicalism.
Matter in motion, nothing more.
No.
Okay. And the second thing was you mentioned that we would come back in the same physical form later on, and that's been addressed in the many worlds hypothesis, because if there's infinitely many worlds, hypothetically there'd be infinitely many of us. But that doesn't work because that would assume.
Well, I'm talking about one world.
Well, no, it's the same thing. The infinite's going in the future and just having one universe after the other, and having just infinitely many universes spread out anywhere would have the same mathematical implications. But the problem is that would assume that the laws of physics have a specific kind of similarity in each of these universes. If there's a different kind of
well, I mean, they wouldn't have to, because if you're going for infinity, eventually, like if it happened once, it can happen again. So there's no reason why it couldn't. So let's say there's a many worlds theory and there's a bunch of worlds where the laws of physics work differently. Okay, then you live a slightly different life, or a very different life depending upon how that goes. But eventually it will happen where the physical laws come back together in very much the same configuration that they did today. But
in the way they address this in the many worlds theory is that there are more possible worlds than could possibly exist. Like, again, it's the Cantor's diagonal proof theory that there's a bigger infinite than possible infinite world. So of all of the worlds that actually exist, that doesn't mean that all worlds exist.
Yeah.
So it doesn't.
So you're talking about the potential.
Yeah. So it could be that there is a spectrum of worlds that can exist and will exist, and it may be that certain of them will not repeat. So it isn't necessarily the case that you will exist again.
I mean, I'll say that certain may not repeat because, again, if we're using change as a constant, but if it came together once, I can see why it would repeat. And I would see it would be slightly more likely that it would repeat than it wouldn't. But yeah, I mean, honestly, a lot of what I said, in my opening statement, I mean, as far as a lot of Western style materialism that I look at, I don't really disagree with Western atheists on the rules in the physical world. I just think they're looking at it the completely wrong way. And so the reason why I believe the way that I believe is, one, it's made me a lot happier. It's led to a lot more success. So great for me. And two, it makes a lot more sense than the very dour and depressing way that I was looking at it before.
I have a question about that, though. You say it makes more sense, but you agree with everything in their worldview. You're just calling it something different. How does it? I agree, okay, so there's basically the stuff that they say, and then there is the emotional content that goes with it. Again, if you listen to Alan Watts, and I highly recommend everyone does because he's phenomenal at this, he talks about prickly people and gooey people. And there's people who want to be very hard-nosed and exactly. And what you find oftentimes with that attitude, and you do see it in the skeptic community, is really that is toxic masculinity. That is this idea based upon the almost empire, where people and you even see it with Sam Harris, where he starts about how we've got to genocide all of the Muslims. There's this idea that life is awful and life is suffering and we've just got to accept it. We've got to bite that bullet. And I don't accept that emotional content that comes along with what science has discovered about the material world. I essentially look at the same data and come to a different conclusion about that data, if that makes sense. Well, one, Sam Harris never said to wipe out.
He didn't literally say it, but he kind of implied it.
Well, I think he was implying that we needed to get rid of the extremist ideology, not necessarily the Muslims.
Yeah, but get rid of him by a nuclear first strike.
I think that was purely a hypothetical. I don't think he actually intended
Yeah, but
that.
I mean, purely a hypothetical. I get it. I understand where he was coming from there. And I don't think if you talk to Sam Harris, he wouldn't say, I support genocide. He's not like the guys I was arguing with a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
But I do think that ideology and the way he talks about Muslims and the way he talks about, I think that enables people who want to make war on Muslims. And a lot of times, like, you got to think, we in the West came from a conquering colonial empire, and there are a lot of justifications, and some of them have come religiously. We're converting people to Christianity. Some of them have come technologically. Hey, some of them.
I mean, I would totally agree that they use that language. they totally use that language in a way to justify their position. I totally agree with that. But I have one last question, which was, you said you came to a different conclusion than the physicalists. Now, for me, from my perspective, it just looks like you have a different interpretation. You have the exact same conclusion, you just call it something different. What do you mean when you come to a different conclusion?
I mean, I come from a different conclusion in that I value different things at the end of it. The physicalists a lot of the time are very stuck inside the human head and the human body and the individual experience, whereas I see that kind of as a trap. So I engage my empathy and I expand outward from my body and try to be less attached to it. And as a result of being less attached to it, I'm happier, I'm more successful, and I'm far less worried about death than I would otherwise. And I don't actually have to believe in magic to come to this conclusion. I just have to look at the facts in a more universal way, in a more connected way, as opposed to a more disconnected way. Like, ultimately, when we're like, we talked a lot about like what makes a person, when it's a person and when it's not a person, and you heard me say I felt like it was a little arbitrary how we were doing it. Like, if you look back at history, people will arbitrarily say, okay, so this period right here, this is the Renaissance, and this period right here, this is the Dark Ages, and this period like here, this is the. But it's arbitrary. We're just grouping them into those categories because it has utility to us. And I see the same thing happening with people, with individuals, with the idea of death and life after death.
Okay, yeah, that's all my questions. That's all I got.
Great. I had some. Oh, I'm sorry, Mark.
TJ, you segued a little bit earlier on the matrix theory. I was wondering how plausible or probable do you think that is?
I think it is slightly more plausible than a God existing, but very improbable.
Okay. Yeah. So let's not push that far. I think there's been a ton of arguments of how that will complicate things more, and then you will say, but then God is more complicated. And then let's not go that way.
I have a. You know what I find the most compelling thing of a God existing, and the fact of and keep in mind, I'm not a believer in a God in a traditional, especially not like a Western kingly sense of a God, but a designer of the universe. I will say this is the single most compelling bit of evidence that I have found it. And it is the existence, by the way, we're about to turn into Joe Rogan. I apologize. The existence of DMT in all organic life, from like blades of grass up to humans. And like, if you've ever done DMT, it's like one of the single most powerful hallucinogenics known to man. And when the human body is dying, it gets a huge dose of DMT to the brain, and a lot of other organisms do as well. Now, what's really interesting about this is that anybody who has experimented knows that it will mess with your sense of time, and I already don't have a good sense of time because
hey guys,
I have ADD.
I was thinking that maybe in that next like 10 minutes we could wrap this up and get to Q&A.
Sure.
If that's okay with all of you guys.
Sure.
Yeah, that sounds great.
That was a really interesting point where you said DMT is a reason to believe in God. Well, I mean, DMT isn't even the most potent chemical in the human body. I think oxygen is, because if you have too much or too little of that, it'll actually be more of a
high.
Yeah. So
right.
But it's actually like one of the top 5 most common elements in the universe too, which is pretty cool.
Cool. Well, yeah, but anyway, my point being is that we talked about life after death, and the one thing that I wanted to bring up is if you're messing around with your perceptions, and I have ADD, so I literally don't notice the passage of time. This whole conversation seems to have taken 15 minutes to me about, and if you mess with that with drugs, it gets even crazier. So what's very interesting is that some people actually think like you do DMT and you actually die. It's a way to die and come back, because the experience of getting high is very similar to out-of-body experiences. My thought is this: if there was a God, and this being did design the physical world but was not within it, it makes a lot of sense that they might actually give a way for beings to actually experience an afterlife, to transmit from one to the other, or to just have the experience of an afterlife. And so a lot of people have speculated that when you're dying, when you get that shot of DMT, what happens is that the time slows down and you literally spend an eternity in the few minutes before you die that is your actual afterlife. Your afterlife is generated by your brain as you go. And that's kind of a way of like having your cake and eating it too. Particularly even in a Buddhist sense. Now, I'm not saying I believe that, but I find that to be a very, very interesting thing. And it is incredible that that chemical is in literally every piece of organic life.
Well, for me, I mean, I appreciate the angle that you're coming from, Brenton. In fact, that could actually possibly open up the discussion for more of the idea of OBE, out-of-body experience, NDE, near-death experience, how there are similarities, people seeing a white light, to which then, TJ, you probably would point out that that's why biochemical things happening in the back of your brain. And there's even some consistency to say that, those chemicals in the background, those are the ones that those are the things that are giving you that white light experience. But that will be a very scientific application on the science. Whereas for me, looking from a Christian philosophy point of view, it will be that, well, of course you're going to see some physical reactions, but that's not the thing that's in control. To me, the soul will be in control of that rather than the body.
Yeah, absolutely.
But,
sorry to turn things into.
We don't have enough. Yeah, we don't have no problem. And we don't. And sad to say, we don't have enough time to go into all that detail. Maybe we can do that another time. Yeah, because OBE and DE is also one of these. I just want to put in just one story, if I may. Because Brenton and TJ, I think one thing that we did mention, although just like a flashby, is the idea of how religion can be manipulative. And I would like to agree, and I will agree that definitely. So you shared quite a bit on Christianity and how it was very much misused. I was very misused, and I would confess to it, and admit to it, repent of it, and that's why we have the Protestant movement and so on and so forth. To which I'm of that tradition. But I also want to share that in my experience also. The manipulation of that karmic philosophy is also quite rampant here in Southeast Asia. So one example that I would like to share is that there was one time I was providing help for young people over in Thailand who, from a very young age, they were told that they were transgender, that they were transvestite, that they were boys, but they were supposed to be pretty-looking girls, and being manipulated into the sex industry in the red light district area in Thailand. So for us, and to me, the one thing that I did find is that they weren't just like pushing it; they really made it quite complex. So the gangster would pick up the boy from the suburbs or in the farm area, bring him to the city, and teach them manipulated dharma and karma to a point to say, oh, the reason why your father sold you to me and you get money and he got money and now you're my slave is because it's because of karma. You guys have to pay for this now. And then this gangster also then, but because I believe in karma, I have a good idea for you, and that is this: you work with me until you're 20 years old. Yeah, you work with me until you're 20 years old, and when you turn 20 years old, I will release you. To which then you have a choice. You either continue to work under me as I'll be your pimp, or you can go and try and find a job on your own. You're free. To which then, if a lot of the young people, because they have been manipulated for 8 years at least into that system, of course they will say, I will go back under the pimp. So one of the things that I find to be most opening to them is that when we find them, we literally go into the street and say, are you turning 20 soon? Are you turning 20 soon? Are you turning 20 soon? And if you are, we provide free food, free lodging, and rehabilitation and help, so they may go on to be successful people. And one of the things that we do have to break it from them is to let them know that they are not byproduct of a karmic reconditioning. They're not the recycled material of a previous life. you probably were not evil in the life before. You were just very much manipulated in this life.
Yeah.
Then for us, for us the cure that would be that the gospel renewal. It renews them. It gives them a new life. It gives a new life experience. It gives them a new stage to life, and that's why one of the testimonies of that would be the champion cheerleading coach in the southern district of Thailand was one of those boy/girl now back to a boy, finding new life, new hope in Christ, and did not think dying was going to help. Did not think dying literally was going to help them, but at least putting to death what happened in the past and finding it anew in Jesus Christ actually helps. Actually gave them that new visage of life. So not just breathe out, but breathe back in anew.
Yeah, you gave them an excuse to change their karma. I love it. Yeah. All right. So are we doing like a closing statement, or are we just going straight into the question and answer?
I'm good with just Q&A.
If you
Same
guys,
here.
do you guys want to do a closing statement, or do you guys just want to go right into questions?
There's a thing I want to read, but if people are anxious to go straight into the questions, I can like post it elsewhere or something.
Okay. I think that probably.
I will have to be right back. I seem to have an urgent call. I'll be right back. To me 1 minute.
How long is the thing you have to read?
Yeah, go ahead and read it.
It's pretty short.
Okay.
All right. So this is On Death by Khalil Gibran. You would know the secret of death, but how shall you find it unless you seek it in the heart of life? The owl whose night-bound eyes are blind unto the day cannot unveil the mystery of light. If you would indeed behold the spirit of death, open your heart wide unto the body of life. For life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. In the depths of your hopes and desires lies your silent knowledge of the beyond. Like the seed dreaming beneath the snow, your heart dreams of spring. Trust the dreams, for in them is hidden the gate to eternity. Your fear of death is but the trembling of a shepherd when he stands before the king whose hand is to be laid upon him in honor. Is the shepherd not joyful beneath his trembling that he shall wear the mark of the king? Yet is he not more mindful of his trembling. For what is it to die but to stand naked in the wind and melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing but to free the breath from its restless tides, that it may rise and expand and seek God unencumbered? Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing, and when you have reached the mountain top, then you shall begin to climb, and when the earth shall claim your limbs, then shall you truly dance. Yeah, Khalil Gibran is legit. That guy's amazing.
He shaved both off, just to be clear.
Oh, that's cool. I mean, blown out as not. So there's a big confusion. There's some Buddhist sects that believe it's literally a cessation where you're not being reborn anymore. Modern Buddhists don't tend to believe that, or at least not modern Mahayana Buddhists from my sect. Nirvana is a state of mind. It's a way of looking at the world as opposed to another realm of existing or not existing, if that makes sense. So, I mean, Christianity, like you could have Christianity with an afterlife, and you could also have Nirvana. Like that's one of the unique things about Buddhism is, Buddhism, people of my sect will say it works whether you believe in it or not. and it tends to work with most, if not all, religious faiths and ideas. There's ways that it's very compatible, and in fact, there's a very strong case to be made that Jesus Christ was a bodhisattva. He didn't spread the Lotus Sutra explicitly, but I think he definitely fits the definition of a Buddha and the behavior of a Buddha if you read the Lotus Sutra, which is the other quote that I may or may not read eventually in here.
They're saying, Sterling, you're muted in the chat. Do you see that? Yeah, they keep saying they can't hear you on modern day debate.
For me? Oh, they can't hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'm just not close up to the mic because it's coming out. So turn it up a little bit.
I'm seeing nothing but the mustache now.
Yeah, my bad. I apologize.
I don't think that's it because I could hear you before, so I think it maybe like
Does
on
it still
the
say I'm muted
restream.
right now, or?
I have to wait and see if the chat updates in a few seconds. But
Okay.
so far, yeah, they're saying they're still repeating the big muted sign and Sterling muted.
I mean, we can repeat the question that you have if you want to keep moving.
Yeah, you could say it, and then we can repeat the question, and then that'll work.
Yeah, I don't know.
We hear you now. As Neffy says, we hear you now.
Okay, I don't know what happened. Maybe I just wasn't close up to the mic. So the question was, any differences in atheistic or Buddhist afterlife if nirvana can be said is blown out of existence? This was by C. Alfredo Sarabia.
And that's what I just answered.
Yeah, that's what he answered. Next one, from the same individual. TJump, saying possible afterlife doesn't disprove. That's what he says.
That's right. It's not meant to. You have the burden of proof. If you claim there is an afterlife, you would have to show there is one that exists and isn't just imaginary. So that's kind of the point, is that it's not meant to disprove. It's meant to show that you have the burden of proof.
Right. And from the same individual, Seifredo Sarabia, at Mark, where are the souls of those who existed before Christ came for salvation? Is there another route aside from Jesus, or is purgatory not in the Bible? Or is there a purgatory not in the Bible?
Well, I'm from the Protestant tradition, so we don't believe in a limbo or purgatory or an in-between. We do believe in a state of sleep. We do believe in a state of sleep where everybody will, even though we all die at the same time. When Christ calls us up, God calls us up at the final days. He will call us all, and we will all rise together at the same time. So from William Shakespeare to myself will all rise at the same time, intuition with that judgment. So where is that state? Where is that conscience? Well, we don't really know in particular. We only know that there is one, simply because in the confession of our faith, we believe that he descended to the dead. To which then the Apostle Peter mentions in 1 Peter that Jesus Christ had gone there to provide the possibility of salvation for those who have yet to hear prior to his incarnation to the world and resurrection. And then when on the third day he rose, then now the truth, the burden of proof or the truth for that possibility of salvation will be through the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is in the scriptures. Yeah. So that's the Pentecost. That's the Protestant reflection of that. I must disclaimer that there are at least a dozen interpretations of that very statement. I do want to say that in the midst of that dozen interpretations, that is not a non-negotiable, meaning to say that you believing that radically differently will not necessarily disagree or degrade you from Christianity. The real focus, therefore, is the person and deity of Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Awesome. From Ronald Mendaka, the answer is I don't know, and you don't know either. But so far, there's no evidence for an afterlife. Anyone disagree? Why?
I mean, I disagree in the sense that I said before, life continues after people die. You know, somebody's died, a baby's born a little while after that. That's afterlife. That's literally the afterlife. Now, if you want to get into like specific afterlives in terms of reincarnation, we talked a lot about that. But you could also look at, even individual reincarnation. You could see continuity between a life that was lived in the 1300s China to a life that was lived in 2028 America. You know, you could say that's that pattern. I've seen that pattern again. And you can consider that the person being reborn, or you can consider that a similar person that just happens to be reborn, that just happened to have been born elsewhere. As far as like my philosophy, there's absolutely no difference in that, and there's not really a particularly good reason to think one way or the other. So just think which way is most you find the most utility in.
Mark, I imagine you want to disagree as well.
Well, I think sorry, what was? Could you please first repeat the question? What was it about?
Ronald said, the answer is I don't know and you don't know either, but so far there is no evidence for an afterlife. And do you disagree, and why?
Well, yeah, simply because just I don't want to seem like I'm sounding like a replay button. But for me, like I said earlier in the talk, I would prefer there to be no afterlife because then the consequence of my life would be YOLO. But the evidence and testimony of the resurrection of Jesus Christ compels me to say that okay, there is an afterlife. And out of all the claims of afterlife, Jesus of Nazareth seems to be the most exclusive. Let me just springboard from what Brenton has said earlier, that there's been much research to say that Jesus was a bodhisattva. The issue that as much as I would appreciate that, and in fact here in Malaysia, quite a number of sects actually add Jesus's picture next to their own gods. So there's so that's not uncommon. But I appreciate it simply because they do notice that there is a divine sublimity as to who Jesus is. But Jesus himself, if you read his claims, I think his words, his claims alone would actually disqualify him for being a bodhisattva. Like what C.S. Lewis would say, that he cannot be regarded as a good teacher because if you get a good teacher to repeat exactly what Jesus did say, you probably think that he's as crazy as a poached egg, claiming to be the Son of God, the only way to eternal life. So that would in the end disengage who Buddha is, and then his death and resurrection would be quite a superior claim to say that not to say that he's superior to other religions sentimentally, but his proof therefore in comparison to Buddhism would be far more extreme as well. So that's why there requires an extreme response to say that Jesus Christ is Lord, and nothing else.
I would quibble with that just with the 4th chapter of St. Luke. The kingdom of God is within you. The kingdom of God is within man. And, if you read Tolstoy, there's a number of ways that you can interpret what Jesus said. And, Jesus also said, I am the Son of Man, not just the Son of God. And in that time period, there were lots of people claiming to be the Son of God. So, I mean, you can certainly look at it that way. I try to take a more universal look at the way Jesus talked about himself. There's also, and this is interesting, there's the concept of expedient means, which is big in Mahayana Buddhism. Are you familiar with the concept?
Not entirely. I was under Theravada, so expedient means, I do know expedient means is unique to Mahayana and Soka Gakkai.
Not just Soka Gakkai, but Mahayana, yeah. So it's in the Lotus Sutra. It explicitly says it like this, and TJ, you'll appreciate this. So essentially, the Buddha will basically lie to you at certain times, but he'll lie to you for your own good. And the concept, well, here, actually, this was the other thing I wanted to read. So this is from the 16th chapter of the Lotus Sutra. And he says, good men, if there are living beings who come to me, I employ my Buddha eye to observe their faith and to see if their faculties are keen or dull. And then depending upon how receptive they are to salvation, I appear in different places and preach to them under different names and describe the length of time under which my teachings will be effective. Sometimes I make my appearance as I say that I am about to enter nirvana, and also employ different expedient means to preach the subtle and wonderful law, thus causing living beings to awaken joyful minds. Good men, the thus come one observes how among living beings there are those who delight in the little law, meager in virtue and heavy in defilement. For such persons, I describe how in my youth I left my household and attained perfect enlightenment. But in truth, the time since I attained Buddhahood is extremely long, as I have told you. It is simply that I use this expedient means to teach and convert living beings and cause them to enter the Buddha way. That is why I speak in this manner. Good men, the scriptures expounded by the thus come one are all for the purpose of saving and emancipating living beings. Sometimes I speak of myself, sometimes of others. Sometimes I present myself, sometimes others. Sometimes I show my own actions, and sometimes those of others. All that I preach is true and not false. Why do I do this? The thus come one perceives the true aspect of the threefold world exactly as it is. There is no ebb or flow of birth and death. There is no existing in this world and later entering extinction. It is neither substantial nor empty, neither consistent nor diverse, nor it is what those who dwell in the threefold world perceive it to be. All such things the thus come one sees clearly and without error. Because living beings have different natures, different desires, different actions, and different ways of thinking and making distinctions, and because I want to enable them to put down good roots, I employ a variety of causes and conditions, similes, parables, and phrases, and preach different doctrines. This, the Buddha's work, I have never for a moment neglected. So what I take from that essentially is that the Buddha will not necessarily tell you what is exactly true all the time. The Buddha will appear in the world for a certain time in a certain emanation and give a teaching. The teaching is meant to apply to specific people at a specific time to tell them what they need to hear to get them closer to enlightenment. In the Lotus Sutra, it's likened to a father has all of his kids are in the house, and he lies to them and says there's toys just outside the house, go out, so that they run out of the house and the house burns down. Again,
Gotcha.
and this is from a Buddhist scripture standpoint, but the idea is that when you hear something in scripture, it's not always necessarily correct for you in this time and place.
Right. Gotcha. Well, I'm sure we all appreciate that. Very interesting reading again, learning that the Buddha is a consequentialist. So
He's a bit of a
Lord
troll.
Jeffrey says, "Hey Brenton, how many times do you think that TJump's chair has reincarnated?"
The chair?
Yeah.
Well, I would say that as many times as anything else is reincarnated. I mean, it's all so existence is Brahma. It's everything that there is being reincarnated into everything. So you hear Shakespeare say, all the world's a stage and the men and women merely players. If you go by a Hindu or Buddhist interpretation, it's not just that, but we're also like the audience and the director and the rafters and the rigging and everything. So yeah, the chair reincarnates just like anything else. It just doesn't have consciousness.
I didn't see that coming. Okay.
I would say that that chair is causing me tanat.
Go ahead.
Because that chair looks comfortable, bro. Can you shout out the brand so that I can get one over here?
Yeah,
Mark,
yeah,
you have to friend me. Mark, you have to friend me on Facebook after this.
yeah, it's a Lazy Boy Crandall recliner. That's the brand.
Oh wow. Okay, I think I can get that. Harvey Norman's here. Gotta take a look at that. Oh man.
Seifredo Sarabia again says, Mark 1, every word counted. All right.
Sigifredo Sarabia?
Yeah, Sarabia. Caleb says, Brent, detail some evidence for reincarnation.
Matter can neither be created nor destroyed. You see reincarnation time and time again. We die, our bodies go into the earth, the materials that make them break apart, and then eventually they come together in life in some other form. I mean, it's the most obvious thing in the universe.
Gotcha. From Talisman Oberlander, we had Western atheism, ain't no gods, yeehaw. Okay.
It's very Western. He's
Very Western.
using a cowboy
Yeehaw.
yell.
That interpretation itself will be a bit of an oxymoron. Yeah.
Okay.
I spent some time in the South. it's quite God fearing there.
Oh, it's true. I don't know, Texan atheism maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Stupid whore energy.
I love this woman.
All neurotransmitters dumped at death because the pumps are failing. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, people always think, like, from life to life, you've got to remember something, like the neurotransmitters are that important. But, like, do you know, like, you don't remember things that happened in your life normally. I have complete blanks. I have a blank from when I was, 1 minute old to, like, about 4 years old or so, or 2 years old. So memory, I don't think, is an important way to judge personhood or life. In just the same way that, direct control over the universe is not the same as direct control over your body. I don't choose to beat my heart. My heart beats on its own. I do it by myself. I don't choose to shine the sun. It just does it. Isn't that awesome?
Anything from you, TJump or Mark, on that? I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's not necessarily memory, but the biochemical processes in the brain is what is done by neurons. So if the neurons stop, then which is the process of those neurons firing, ends permanently.
Sure, but that's only because you choose to value that biochemical process in those neurons.
Yes, I value consciousness and being awake, and I don't want to not be awake.
Yeah, that's the problem, because you're eventually not going to be awake, so get comfortable with that.
Two things I would say to this is that, yes, as much as I would agree on the principle of conserving energy, I do believe that because there had been a beginning of the universe, the cosmos, therefore the end, and therefore the universe would therefore be quite unique in itself. Depending on your view of time, could the universe be exactly the same even within time, or the next universe, or could the next universe be same but different because of a linear progression of time? That's another discussion altogether. But the point that I'll put therefore is that because there's a beginning and an end, there will also be and there's a genius behind that creativity. I will poison the idea of an author, of a creator. And that creator has made us uniquely, each and every one of us, and our interaction will be unique, every one of us. And therefore, that's why for me, very different from the Buddhist experience of a new life, is that the new life is that for us, our new life in Christ is still, by identity, the same person. I will still be Mark Tan at the end of days. But by the grace of God, I will be renewed because of His redemptive work on the cross and at the tomb. So in terms of memory, yes, we will be held accountable, because even if we don't remember, then God remembers. I know that sounds scary at times, but that also poisons a relationship, that poisons an interaction, that poisons a transcendent connection between what we cannot see and what we can see, what we call divine, and us, material.
Awesome. Okay. Another question, reincarnation question. Stupid or energy again. Do you think L. Ron Hubbard was a reincarnated Buddha?
Yes, because literally everybody is a reincarnated Buddha. So Nam-myoho Renge Kyo means every being possesses the Buddha nature, and this Buddha nature can awaken within any human within a single lifetime. So, yeah, L. Ron Hubbard was a reincarnated Buddha. So was Hitler. So was Jesus. So was, Albert Einstein. Everybody. The thing is, L. Ron Hubbard was also really, really asleep. He was completely in the grip of the devil king of the sixth heaven, of Maya, of a lot of illusion, and he hurt a lot of people, which is a shame, which is why, again, it's very important that, the Lotus Sutra be spread and that people realize what's actually going on here, as opposed to getting snared by, fundamental darkness.
Okay. Decepticons Forever says, Silver Surfer has better feats and stories than God. For what it's worth.
I thought the withering of the fig tree that Jesus did, that's pretty cool.
Well, okay, so the problem with equating superheroes in general to the person that is Jesus is that superheroes tend to be destined to the consequence. And Brenton, you being an author and writer, you will know that the protagonist is as good as the environment in which he is in. If there is no environment, then the protagonist is just nobody. It's just someone else. The issue then, the big difference therefore between the superhero, like any protagonist in a main story, is that Jesus in himself, even before coming into this earth, is a story of his own, and that is in the very nature of who God is. Yeah, so we look at some mysteries, like even for human souls, for example, when God spoke to Jeremiah, he said, "Before I formed you in the womb of your mother, I knew you." So therefore, your consciousness, your existence, before it even began materialistic in this world, is already first known in the mind of God, and that brings a beautiful a connection with us. But let us not forget that it is not that, unlike Silver Surfer, for example, the protagonist is not dependent. Is not dependent on the scenario. The scenario changes and transforms because of that. Because of Jesus.
Awesome. Yes.
Like I like Professor X. That's my.
It's
pretty cool.
I'm closer to him than any of you guys. Can I just can we just jokingly just acknowledge the fact that Brenton, the Western Buddhist, looks more like Jesus than me, Christian?
I do look more like a Buddhist than him.
Yeah, and I look like a monk.
That's funny, but yes, I will agree with that. I got a tattoo on my ribs and was stumbling around. I was a lot thinner than I am now, and so I got this it's a raven carrying a pair of glasses for my dead friend, and I was stumbling around on like one of the best highs of my life, and the guys in the tattoo shop called me Evil Jesus.
Man.
Oh my gosh. Martin C says, TJump, do you agree both Buddhism and Christianity are essentially a happy place responses to deal with a scary reality?
Essentially, yeah. Most religious beliefs are grounded in the comfort of an afterlife.
Well,
says,
can I nuance that a little bit?
I'm sorry?
Can I nuance that a little
bit?
Well, two things I would say is that I would disagree. But for me, is a big burden, you know. Like in the idea of an afterlife, and I go against God in His ways, then yeah, it's not happy. It's not happy for me. The only reason why it's happy because of the redemption is because the redemption and the new life that I can have in Christ Jesus. The second thing I would say to that also is that yes, it is. Let's say, for example, you disagree or you do not believe in the reality of God. Then yes, even if it is a happy place, why not? I mean, Richard Dawkins himself did mention that at Christmas time he would put the Christmas tree, hang the laurels, sing the Christmas carols. Not because it gives them happiness for life after death, but it is a happy thing that you can participate, and we welcome you to it.
Yeah. What I'll say about this is there's a certain type of person and certain type of idea that something is real in as much as it hurts. And I think this actually comes from the fact that we don't really get a sense of ourselves until we are in conflict. And you even see it with like S&M stuff. And by the way, I'm not kink shaming. S&M's super fun. But like, you know, and it can be fun to feel the pain and to like, even if you got a masseuse working on your back, sometimes you want to tighten up and just feel that pain so that you can then later on release it. But I don't think that just because something is painful or depressing that makes it true. And I think there's actually kind of a dangerous route of self-harm that I do see a lot of Western atheists go down because they get this very toxic masculinity. I'm a guy, I'm going to be hard-nosed and face the real awful reality, and then they wind up absolutely miserable. You know, and I don't think there's any more reality in that just because it hurts.
Right. Awesome. Kalub says, so you're calling grass on a grave reincarnation. And he's really going after you.
Grass on the grave is reincarnation. The chipmunk's reincarnation. The freaking hawk is reincarnation. The table is reincarnation. It's just there's nobody in here but us.
Even the Lion King will agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When Mufasa shared to Simba that we're all partly connected to the great circle of life. If you want to go from that angle. I would
True.
go from the
Though
perspective.
Mufasa had the unfortunate circumstance of reincarnating into clouds. I don't know if I would prefer that.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
Oh my God, guys! If you ever get a chance to see Lion King on Broadway, one, make sure you're sober. But two, the creation of Mufasa that they do in like the Julie Taymor is freaking insane. Like the theater effect that they do, it is one of the most impressive things. Like if I had been on certain substances and gone into that, I might have come out believing that the lion was God. So,
Okay. All right. So that's one on the bucket list after MCO.
go to New
for
York,
me-
see Lion King.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I think we can end there and go to the next question. Sure.
awesome. So last question for today from Kalub again. James, your eyebrow will reincarnate. I promise. So we'll all send our thoughts and prayers out to James.
Not if I have anything to say about it.
Oh gosh, is that a threat or a promise?
Promise, for sure.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I'd like to thank all the speakers for being here today. It was a great chat. I really enjoyed moderating it. I'd like to apologize for tech issues. It's my first stream by myself, doing all this at the same time. Yeah, so thank you guys. If you guys want to say anything, if not, we'll be out of here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Thanks for Brenton and Mark for coming in and talking. I appreciate listening to your viewpoints. I appreciated the quotes. I really like the quotes from the Buddhist documents. I thought those were really pretty. I definitely Matt, Mark. I really love your balcony. Like looking out your window. That is a really cool view. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Just to get people to know what I'm talking about, what you guys are talking about. Hang on. So the interesting thing about Malaysia is that you get religion right at the doorstep. So there's a Buddhist temple, there's a Hindu temple down there. You know, so yeah. And in that aspect, I would like to thank each and every one of you. I was actually a little bit worried because I am familiar with Western exertion, you know. But now I found it to be actually very comforting to be able to exchange information to one another, to be able to share what we truly believe in our hearts, and yet at the same time we can still come to a cordial relationship. I want this to be a relationship. So, Tom, as soon as this restriction orders are lifted, I am looking forward to bringing to have you in Malaysia. And Brenton, please come along.
I would love to. That sounds great.
Yeah.
What I'll just say is, you guys, this was probably the best debate I've had on this channel, to tell you the truth. You guys both really knew your stuff. You went into it. You weren't Nazis. And
not really a high bar there. I don't know.
Yeah. And so I had a blast here. If people want to check me out, I'm the author of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse. I have a novel coming out that I've done in collaboration with a band called the Crew Shadows, where it begins when the main character dies. Just look me up at brentonlengel.com, and please, if you can, subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm trying to get 1,000 subscribers, and I've been growing pretty steadily, so check it out. You'll hear more philosophy and art stuff there. And wonderful. I had a blast. Please, both of you guys, friend me on Facebook if you can.
All right. Cool.
Awesome.
Good comic, by the way. Loved it. Yeah.
Do you have a copy?
Well, no, I was only able to find bits and pieces here and there and then come the story together.
If you friend me, I'll send you a PDF.
Oh, right now.
Ooh, online piracy. Yum. That's what we want to put on the internet. The FD is going to be right after you.
I'm the author. It's not piracy.
Oh, my bad. I apologize.
How much does it cost for a signed copy?
For a signed copy, I can get you one of those for the first and second issue. I'll get them both signed, $25 plus shipping and handling.
No, it's not too bad.
Yeah, you want to if you PayPal that to me, because I just closed a successful Kickstarter. I've got extra copies coming around.
Sure.
Yeah, so you're in the U.S., right?
Yep.
It's $27.
Cool. I'll send you a message on Facebook.
Yeah, send me a message.
Well, thank you everybody for coming in. We keep sorting out the reasonable from the unreasonable.